Welcome to Styled by Estelle.
Hey, Estelle Winsett, attorney turned personal stylist for female lawyers. And in today's episode, I'm going to be talking to you about being camera ready and how the rules of style have changed since we've emerged into a more virtual world. And I'm going to share with you some tips and tricks on how to navigate this new legal landscape. One of the biggest shifts that I've seen in today's changing landscape into a more virtual world is that we're no longer going into the courtroom as much as we used to. And what that means is your entire presence is being evaluated by the confines of your computer screen. When you're going into the courtroom, you were able to use your wide gestures. You were able to walk and talk. And the judge and jury were able to make an impression of you from their entire experience of you, which you had a lot bigger stage to make that impression. Now that we're on more Zoom courtroom hearings, then what you need to do is work with the screen that you have, which is just your computer screen. And because of that, you need to really pay attention to details. They matter a lot more than it used to when you would walk into a room and people could feel your presence. In this virtual world, the question is no longer, do I look professional? It's how am I going to be perceived on camera? And that's a lot different from how you would be perceived in the mirror. And that's why it's really important to practice on your Zoom calls. You can do your own Zoom call at home before you get on a courtroom proceeding call and see how you look. See what the screen sees. Is there anything distracting in your background? Is there any part of your jewelry that's making a loud noise? You really want to pay attention to those details because that is how you're making your first impression now. It's how you're showing up on the camera on this screen. So that's something you need to consider. The next question that I get often is, do I really have to dress up head to toe for a Zoom call when I'm only being perceived from the shoulders up? And my answer to that question is yes. And what I think in that position is that you need to be thinking of what's called enclosed cognition. So there actually have been scientific studies that have shown that what you wear impacts how you show up and how you perform. So it's less about what others are thinking, but how you're thinking. So if you know you're sitting at the desk and you have pajamas on the bottom and a blazer on top, your brain knows you're not completely there. You're not showing up fully. But when you actually dress head to toe and you have your shoes on, even though no one's looking at your feet, and you have a complete outfit on, it's almost like a signal to your brain that game on. We are now here to perform. And you're able to actually perform at your highest level when you show up fully in a head to toe outfit. Another thing to think about when you're on these Zoom appearances is to think about color. Because when you're on the camera, everything is flattened. And I get asked the question a lot, what color should I wear when I'm showing up for a Zoom meeting? And my best recommendation is actually a jewel tone because those are going to be universally flattering. It's more of a mid-tone saturation, and so it's going to play nicely with the screen. Typically, if you wear black or a dark color, it can come across more harshly on the screen. Conversely, if you wear white or a light color, then it may end up messing with the lighting and you actually get blown up. So in one case you get washed out and in the other case you get blown up on the screen. So what you want to be doing is coming up with a color that is going to be pleasing, that is going to be confident, and is not distracting. And one tip that I always tell people is make sure that whatever you're wearing is a contrast to your background. So if you have a white wall behind you and you're wearing a white top, then you're basically going to look like a floating head. And that is not what we're going for. You want to have the appropriate amount of contrast. And so really as a good rule of thumb, I suggest wearing jewel tone colors. And take a look at it on the screen and make sure on your own Zoom recording that everything looks right before you go. When you have a virtual mediation, you want to think not only about the clothes you're wearing, but also the colors. There's a psychology of color that shows that what you wear invokes an emotional response in someone else. For something like a mediation where you're really trying to evoke a feeling of trust, then I highly recommend going with a blue. You can go with a cobalt blue or a saturated blue color, and that actually is going to evoke emotions of trust from your audience. You want to avoid going with, say, a red, which is more of a powerhouse color, but it can also be seen as aggressive. So you want to be thinking through the psychology of color when you're coming up not only with the clothes to wear, but also which color. A question that I get asked often is, can I wear patterns or prints on camera? And my answer to that is yes, as long as it's not distracting. If you end up wearing pinstripes where the colors are really close together, that's when you get that vibrant, almost psychedelic look on the camera because the lines are fighting and it looks crazy. So what I really recommend is go with a solid color, or you could go with stripes like I have where there's a lot of gap between the stripes. You don't want stripes really close together or you're going to get that really weird vibrating thing that's going to make people dizzy. So when in doubt, go with a solid color. One of my favorite tips when you have a Zoom hearing is to think about accessories, especially as a female attorney. When you're really working with just this square box, then think about what can you wear that's going to add personality without being distracting. For me, I have on some earrings. They're not loud earrings. You also want to think through with your accessories, are they making a lot of unnecessary noise? These are very silent and they're very lightweight, but it just adds a little bit of personality to my look. And it also gives what I think is a finishing touch. But when you're thinking through your accessories, make sure that you're not going too heavy on the accessories. If I were to be wearing a big necklace, a chunky necklace, earrings, and a headband, that's going to be way too much. I think it was Chanel that says, look in the mirror and take off one accessory before you leave. That's actually a really good rule of thumb when you're thinking about what to wear for a Zoom meeting. Focus on one focal piece of jewelry that's not loud and that's not distracting, that can add some interest and have you stand out in all the right ways. Another question that I get asked often is, should I wear glasses on a Zoom call? Well, as you can see today, I am wearing glasses for this video. And the reason I'm wearing them is because I normally wear glasses. And if you're someone who always wears glasses, if you show up to a hearing on Zoom and you're not wearing your glasses, then you're not going to look like yourself. I think that wearing glasses also provides a level of credibility and authority. If you've ever heard me talk about the first time I realized style was a tool that you could use to advance your credibility, is when I first learned that I needed to wear glasses, which was after law school and after years of reading. But when I got my first pair of glasses and I walked into my law firm, I could feel the shift in the way the partners were looking at me. It's all of a sudden I had this gravitas that I had not had previously, despite having the years of experience. So when you're on a Zoom call, it's the same thing. If you're someone who wears glasses, wear them. It's going to add that credibility and you're going to look like yourself. The only caveat that I would add to wearing glasses on a camera on Zoom is you want to make sure that you don't have a glare. So you want to play with the lighting. If you wear glasses all the time, you probably want to get some anti-reflective lenses. That's probably going to be the best solution to your problem. But you want to just make sure that the glare is not distracting and that you have a clear vision when people are looking at you with your glasses on. Another question that I get asked, that it's particularly true for female lawyers, is should I care for how I show up in my grooming on a Zoom call versus being in court? And my answer to that is yes. Everything on a camera is going to flatten out colors, how you're perceived. And in particular, you will often come across as a little more washed out because of the dimensions of the camera. So what I always recommend for my women attorney clients is there are a couple of things you can do to enhance how you show up on screen without being heavy on makeup and going to an extreme. First, I recommend your lips actually show up a little bit more pale on the camera. So put on some lipstick. It doesn't have to be a super bold color, but something that's going to give you definition to your lips. Another thing that actually adds a lot to a Zoom appearance is actually filling in your eyebrows. I know it sounds strange. I actually have pretty thick eyebrows, but when I add just a little bit of shadow to them, it adds more definition. And so your eyebrows and your lips are what's going to frame your face. And so those are things that I recommend as a female attorney to do on the camera so that you're not washed out and that you can show up visibly without going crazy on adding a bunch of makeup. Thanks for joining me on today's episode. And if you liked the material that I shared, I encourage you to like this episode, make a comment. And if you really like it, I'd love it if you'd leave a review. That helps the audience find me on the podcast.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.